Welcome, restless dreamer. You've just stepped into the shadows of sleep, where stories whisper and the darkness listens. I'm your guide tonight, your voice in the void, here to lead you gently into nightmares wrapped in lullabies. Before we begin, press like if you're brave enough, and subscribe for more midnight tales that blur the line between sleep and terror. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what hour has found you? The call came on a Thursday afternoon. I was elbow deep in a faulty laptop at my tiny repair shop in Philadelphia when the lawyer's gravelly voice crackled through the receiver. You're the sole beneficiary of Howard Beaumont's estate. Howard, my mother's older brother, someone who had vanished from our lives decades ago after some argument nobody ever mentioned. Mom had been gone for years, and Howard had no other living relatives. That made me the default heir. The Victorian mansion in Stillwater, northern Pennsylvania, was a 5-hour drive. I'd never been there, never even heard the town mentioned, but Fredrickson, the lawyer, assured me it was all legitimate. Howard had been found dead in his study. Heart attack, he said, surrounded by boxes of newspapers and research materials. I left at dawn Saturday. The GPS guided me up twisting mountain roads that narrowed as I neared Stillwater, eventually giving way to cracked, forgotten 2-lanes. The town itself looked like it had been abandoned. Main Street was a strip of boarded-up shops, a diner with 3 pickups outside, and a gas station where the attendant gave me a look like I'd sprouted a second head when I asked about Howard. The house sat at the edge of town, up a gravel drive bordered by hedges that scraped my car. It was enormous, 3 stories of peeling gray paint, ornate woodwork, and a sagging wraparound porch. Windows glinted like empty eyes, staring. The key was hidden under a stone frog, just as Fredrickson said. Inside, the air hit me. Dust, old paper, and something chemical, sharp enough to burn. The study was just as Fredrickson described. First door on the right, past the grand staircase. Howard had transformed it into a labyrinthine archive. Corkboards covered every wall, stuffed with newspaper clippings, photographs, and notes, all connected by colored string. Red for disappearances, blue for property records, green for society activities. His cramped handwriting scrawled on every scrap. The oak desk at the center groaned under stacks of yellowed documents and leather journals. I picked up the closest journal, dated just weeks before Howard died. They know I'm getting close. Found another pipe in the basement wall behind the wine rack. Same diameter as the others. Whatever they're moving through this house, they need a network for it. My breath caught. Pipes. Network. I didn't yet understand, but my skin tingled. I moved to the corkboards. Disappearances spanning decades. Oldest clipping. A traveling salesman abandoned near the house. Another. A runaway teenager. A homeless veteran. All last seen within a mile of the Victorian. Red pins formed a rough circle on Howard's hand-drawn map. Then the photographs. Black and white. Groups of men in suits standing in front of the house, faces serious. Names on the back. Stillwater Preservation Committee. Surnames matched the few businesses still open. Howard wasn't documenting history. He was tracking a conspiracy. Hours passed as I pieced together his research. The committee wasn't preserving the town. They were preserving secrets. Property records showed the Victorian had been bought by the committee, but kept under rotating member names to avoid suspicion. Surveillance notes, license plates, arrival times, even recorded conversations. One transcript. New infrastructure is almost complete. 3 more months and we can resume operations at full capacity. This was weeks old. And then, my focus snapped to the basement. Howard had mapped it. Behind the kitchen, sealed with layers of paint, was a hidden network of pipes he'd been tracking. I pried open the door, wooden steps groaning under my weight. The chemical smell intensified, metallic and sickly. The basement was massive, full-length stone walls, concrete floor, chalk marks, measurements. Behind the wine rack, a hole. PVC pipes branching like veins, and then scratches, fresh, leading from the pipes to a newly installed drain. I froze. Someone was here. The front door upstairs opened, loud, confident. Footsteps multiplied, heavy, deliberate. I killed my flashlight and ducked behind the furnace. Voices filtered through the floorboards. Check every room. Make sure he didn't leave anything new. Nephew's car is here. He's asking questions. A man responded. Garrison called. He stopped at the diner an hour ago, showing Howard's photo around. I felt the walls close in. They'd been watching me since I arrived. The woman's voice cut sharp. Good. We've got maybe 15 minutes before he comes back. Get the remaining documents from the study. Check if Howard found the secondary hub in the attic. Secondary hub. Another layer of this operation. My heart thudded as I crept back to the stairs. Through a crack, I counted at least 4 people moving like they owned the house. One voice. The diner cook. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mr. Beaumont. Call immediately. Urgent information. Fredrickson never called on weekends. Someone here had my number. I powered the phone off and shoved it deep into my pocket. Howard had planned for escape. The basement had a hidden exit, an old coal chute, hidden behind a metal shelf. I pushed it aside, clattering a paint can. Silence. Did you hear that? A voice asked. He's in the basement. The kitchen door burst open. Feet pounded down the stairs. Panic surged. I dove into the chute, narrow, dust-choked, rust scraping my shoulders. Voices shouted behind me. Metal clanged as they tried to grab me. I twisted, shoved, climbed, and finally shot into daylight. The side yard bordered thick woods. Branches tore at me, face and clothes. Engines roared behind me. I had maybe a 5-minute head start. Howard had hidden copies of his research, and I knew where the nearest was. A rock formation a 1/4 mile into the woods, marked by 3 white blazes on an oak tree. I found it. A waterproof container with flash drives, photocopies, and a prepaid phone. I dialed the programmed number while moving deeper into the trees. Mr. Howard. Thank God. I cut her off. Howard's dead. I have his research. They're after me. Listen carefully. I'm Agent Diane Russo, DEA. Howard was helping us build a case. Those pipes. Distribution infrastructure for synthetic fentanyl. The Stillwater Preservation Committee has been using that house for years. Disappearances. People who got too close. Stay hidden. We're minutes out with a tactical team. I ran, guided to an abandoned ranger station a mile north. Concrete block, steel door, barricaded. Listened as dogs tracked me, then drifted away. Minutes later, sirens and helicopters. Agents swarmed the house. Committee members arrested on the spot. Weapons, evidence, the works. Agent Russo found me after the scene secured. Howard had documented everything to build an airtight case. His heart attack was suspicious, but they couldn't prove murder. The house and distribution points seized. The town's mayor, police chief, and others arrested. I never returned to Stillwater. I received a settlement from Howard's estate, enough to start over far from Pennsylvania. Sometimes I think about the missing people Howard tracked. Russo said they excavated parts of the property but wouldn't tell me what they found. Some questions are better left unasked. The adrenaline faded slowly, replaced by exhaustion. Even safe miles away, I couldn't stop replaying that house, the basement, the pipes, and the people hunting me. Every detail haunted me. The scratches in the concrete, the fresh drain, the coal chute, and the hidden attic hub. Howard hadn't just stumbled onto a crime. He had uncovered a well-oiled machine. The Preservation Committee wasn't just protecting secrets. They were running a sophisticated, decades-long drug distribution operation under the town's nose. I replayed the moment I found the research cache under the oak tree. Flash drives, documents, copies of Howard's notes, proof. The organization's tentacles reached everywhere. The diner cook, the mayor, the police chief, all implicated. How many more towns had similar networks I'd never even think to suspect? At night, I couldn't sleep. Shadows in my apartment stretched too long. Sounds of creaking floors and doors made my chest tighten. Every time the phone rang or a knock came at the door, my blood ran cold. I had Howard's settlement, but it wasn't just money that I inherited. It was the weight of what he'd found. Agent Russo called every few days, checking if I was safe, guiding me through anonymous reporting, ensuring nothing slipped through the cracks. She confirmed that the DEA had dismantled much of the infrastructure in Stillwater, but refused to share what they'd uncovered about the bodies or chemical residues. Some things, she said, are better left unshared. I began documenting everything I remembered. Howard's journals, the pipes, the attic, the secondary hub. Even the small details that seemed irrelevant at first. The chalk marks, the color-coded string, the newspaper clippings. The more I wrote, the more the picture emerged. Howard hadn't just been obsessive. He had been meticulous, brave, and, ultimately, tragically alone. Sometimes, I think about the people Howard tracked. Were they victims? Or did some escape without anyone ever noticing? Agent Russo assured me that many were found and rescued, but there are always gaps in the story, shadows between the lines of evidence. I moved across the country after everything settled. New city, new job, no mention of Stillwater. Yet even here, certain things trigger memories. The smell of dust mixed with chemicals, peeling paint, and that faint metallic tang of old iron. The house remains under government control. The surrounding properties, once part of the distribution network, stand empty. Howard's estate provided me a new start, but not peace. I can't stop thinking about the meticulous care with which the committee hid everything for decades, how a small town could hide a massive operation under the noses of every resident who thought they knew their neighbors. Occasionally, I receive letters from concerned citizens, historians, or former residents who claim something feels off about the town's history. I never reply. Some stories aren't mine to tell. Howard tried to leave a map, but even he couldn't account for every shadow, every hidden passage, every disappearance. I visit the local archives when I can, quietly, under an assumed name, searching for any scrap of Howard's past notes or mentions of Stillwater's secrets. Each discovery reminds me, curiosity has a price, and sometimes the answers are dangerous. Yet I can't stop thinking about Howard, alone in that house, uncovering decades of deception, mapping networks that most people would never notice, getting closer to the truth every day. And then, when he was finally at the brink of exposing everything, he dies. Heart attack, maybe. Maybe not. The house stands as a monument to his work, a silent archive of secrets too dangerous for the world to see. I've inherited more than money. I've inherited vigilance, paranoia, and the responsibility of knowing the truth. I think about the pipes, the networks, the disappearance circle still marked in Howard's old maps. Sometimes, when I lie awake at night, I imagine the attic hub humming, the hidden drainage system still active. Somewhere someone could be watching. Someone could be maintaining Howard's network without ever being detected. And I know, deep down, some questions will never be answered. The missing, the pipelines, the secrets, they're part of a history few will ever understand. Howard's voice echoes in my head. They know I'm getting close. I'm still getting close. And I know they're watching. The drive from Michigan to Arizona was supposed to be the ultimate post-graduation adventure. Just me and my best friend Kelsey, two 20-somethings with a beat-up Ford Explorer, a trunk full of snacks, and a carefully curated road trip playlist we'd already memorized. We had been on the road for days when we spotted a small, faded exit sign that read, Riverbend. Kelsey practically leapt out of her seat. "This is it," she said, her eyes sparkling. She had been reading about the town in one of those America's Forgotten Towns articles she loved. The feature called Riverbend, a place frozen in time, home to a massive mill from the 1800s that supposedly still housed all its original equipment. "It'll only add an hour," she promised. I should have hesitated when the gas station attendant a mile back went unusually quiet after Kelsey mentioned our destination. Something about the way he didn't blink made me uneasy, but I didn't say anything. At first, Riverbend seemed harmless. The main street stretched a single block, lined with brick buildings that hadn't changed since the 1920s. A diner flickered with a neon sign that looked like it belonged in a museum. But something was off. There were maybe 100 people in town, yet the streets were eerily empty for a Saturday afternoon. Every passerby stared at our Explorer like they were memorizing the license plate. The air smelled faintly metallic, like the town itself was holding its breath. The mill sat on the far edge of town, past a row of houses with curtains drawn tight despite the blazing sun. Kelsey practically vibrated with excitement. "Look at that water wheel. Can you imagine the engineering?" she whispered as we got closer. The building was massive, red brick worn to a dull crimson, with shattered windows and vines clawing up its walls. No trespassing signs were nailed across every entrance, but the fence was riddled with gaps. We squeezed through one, and I immediately smelled it. Musty wood mixed with iron, like old pennies rotting in damp soil. Inside, the main floor looked abandoned, yet strangely lived in. Rusted machinery loomed in shadows, shafts of sunlight cutting through broken windows. Graffiti covered the walls, and the floor was thick with dust. Kelsey bounced around, snapping photos, marveling at the enormous grinding stones that must have weighed several tons. I wandered toward a crumbling office area in the back, where an old door creaked under my push. Filing cabinets had been ransacked long ago, papers strewn like snow across the floor. Then I saw it, half hidden under a toppled desk covered in decades of grime. A leather wallet, worn and yellowed with age. I called Kelsey over. She knelt beside me as I flipped it open. A driver's license read, Douglas Hartley, Kansas, expired 1964. There was cash, old bills, and family photos of children who would now be in their 40s if their father had ever come home. Kelsey found another wallet wedged behind the filing cabinet, then another, and another. Once we really started looking, the building seemed packed with them, wallets, purses, IDs, and car keys scattered across decades and states. Old Ford keys, Chevy keys, rental car fobs that probably didn't even exist anymore. My chest tightened. These weren't just lost items. These people hadn't walked away. They'd never made it back to their vehicles. I froze as Kelsey whispered, "We need to call the police." I pulled out my phone, only to see the dreaded no signal. Not even emergency calls would go through. Kelsey checked hers. Same thing. We were trapped. We decided to document everything first, taking pictures of the IDs, wallets, and keys. But as I snapped the last photo, the mill door slammed shut behind us. Not the wind. There wasn't any wind. The sound echoed through the empty building, deliberate, final. Then came the footsteps. Male voices, casual but menacing, drifted through the broken windows. "Michigan plates, huh? Probably worth a decent price at the chop shop in Frankfurt." Another voice, gravelly and older, said, "We'll wait until dark. Cleaner that way." They knew we were in the building. They weren't asking questions. They were deciding how to deal with us. Panic surged. Kelsey typed frantically, trying to send messages, but nothing went through. I remembered the old loading dock door on the far side of the building. If we could crawl there unnoticed, maybe we could slip out while the men were still at the front. Heart hammering, we moved low across the dusty floor, knees scraping against rust and rubble. Every sound felt amplified, every breath a risk. Then we saw him, a man in coveralls, weathered face, rifle in hand, standing at the water intake. Behind him, 2 more men were positioned at opposite corners. They had us trapped without even trying, like predators who knew exactly where prey would run. Kelsey's face went pale, but she whispered, "Look, there." I followed her finger to an old grain chute in the floor, a rusted grate covering a hole that descended into darkness. It was the only way out they hadn't counted on. The grate gave way more easily than I expected. Rust had eaten through most of the bolts. I went first, landing hard on a floor that smelled of decades of stagnant air, grain powder, and something organic, rotten and unmistakably wrong. Kelsey followed, and we shone our phone lights around the basement. It was a maze of support beams, old storage shelves and debris. Personal belongings were strewn across the floor. Watches, rings, a child's stuffed bear. But what caught my eye were the deep gouges in the wooden pillars, dark stains around them. People had been kept down here. People had tried to claw their way out. Kelsey's hand trembled as she pointed toward a tunnel at the far end, a drainage pipe perhaps 2 feet in diameter leading away from the mill. The metal was corroded but intact, and it stretched beyond the reach of our lights. The men above were moving now, footsteps heavy on the old floorboards, shouting that they knew we were in there. My heart sank. We had no choice but to crawl into the pipe. The crawl was brutal. We dragged ourselves through decades of accumulated dirt, rust, and whatever had fallen through the floors above. Every scrape against the metal felt like fire against our skin, and the air was almost unbreathable. Behind us, echoes of the men's voices distorted through the pipe, shouting and calling for us, but we didn't dare stop. Panic propelled us forward until, finally, the tunnel opened into a concrete junction box near the river, about a half-mile from the mill. Sunlight filtered through trees as we emerged, covered in rust and filth, lungs burning. We ran through the woods along the riverbank, staying low, moving from tree to tree, circling back toward the explorer. In the distance, the mill loomed, flashlights moving inside as if hunting for us. We reached the car, shaking hands, fumbling with keys, engine roaring on the third try. We sped through the empty main street, catching glimpses of curtains moving in darkened windows. Faces watched, silent and calculating. At the gas station a mile out, the attendant from before nodded slowly at our disheveled appearance. "Lucky," he said. "Most people who stop in Riverbend don't stop anywhere else after that." We didn't argue. We drove straight to Arizona, stopping only for gas, our nerves still frayed. Kelsey wanted to call the FBI immediately. I insisted we wait until we were somewhere safe. In Phoenix, we reported everything. IDs, wallets, keys, detailed descriptions of the men in the mill. At first, the FBI agent seemed interested, asking questions and taking notes. But after making a few calls, his demeanor changed. "We'll look into it," he said carefully. "But sometimes old mills collect debris over the years. People lose things, probably just spooked by some locals pulling a prank." Weeks later, Kelsey received a call. The case was closed due to lack of evidence. Checking online, we discovered something even more unsettling. Every photo we had taken inside the mill was corrupted, showing nothing but black screens. Riverbend itself had vanished from Google Maps. The exit we had taken was now just empty highway. And yet, I know it's still there. That town, with its hidden mill, its covered-up secrets, waiting for the next car with out-of-state plates to stop. The next travelers who are curious, adventurous, or foolish enough to believe the quaint charm of America's forgotten towns. I can still see those deep gouges in the wooden pillars. I can still smell the decay and rust, and I can still hear the faint echo of footsteps in the metal tunnel. Riverbend isn't a story in a magazine anymore. It's real, and it's patient, and it's waiting. I never imagined I'd find myself driving hours out of Denver for some ghost town. But my buddy Jake, he had this obsession with abandoned places, urban exploration, and filming it for his small YouTube channel, had convinced me. Fresh out of college, bartending nights downtown and pretending I had a plan for my journalism degree, I figured I had nothing better to do. The road to Black Ridge wound through mountains, a thin ribbon of dirt snaking between ridges and cliffs, the kind of road where one wrong turn could mean sliding 100 feet down into the trees. Jake was practically vibrating with excitement beside me, rattling off obscure historical facts he'd scavenged from old Colorado archives. Mining boomtown, sudden collapse, mysterious disappearances, payouts to families. The official story was simple. Cave-ins, insurance pulled out, the town died. But the whispers he'd found, the families leaving at night, properties bought out for more than they were worth, made my skin crawl. We arrived in the early afternoon. Black Ridge sat in a valley that seemed to swallow the sky, its few dozen buildings reduced to skeletons of wood and brick. Main Street was a wide dirt strip lined with storefronts, windows smashed or boarded up, signs barely hanging on their rusted hooks. The air wasn't quiet. It was heavy, pressing, like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Jake parked near what was once a general store. Its sign faded, but still readable. Morrison's Goods and Supplies. He grabbed his camera, straps digging into his shoulder, and I hoisted my backpack. Flashlights, water, the usual gear. We stepped into the town, our footsteps loud on the hard dirt, echoing in the empty streets. The first oddity struck immediately. The church at the end of Main Street. While everything else crumbled, roofs caving, doors hanging loose, windows shattered, this building stood almost untouched. The white paint peeled, the steps rotted, but the windows were intact, the door locked, and a brass knob gleamed faintly in the sun. Jake's eyes lit up. "We're starting here," he said, voice trembling with anticipation. "This is perfect footage." When we got closer, my stomach dropped. Fresh tire tracks crisscrossed the dirt, no more than a day or two old. The church door was secured with a hefty master lock, nothing like the rusted remnants on the other buildings. Black fabric covered the windows from the inside. Jake tried to peek through a small gap and recoiled. "It smells wrong," he muttered. "Like chemicals, like the stuff my dad used in that funeral home he ran." I felt my chest tighten. This was no ordinary abandoned town. We moved on, heading toward the old mining company office. 2 stories of red brick, with Ridgeline Copper Corporation carved in stone above the entrance. The door was gone, leaving only an empty frame into shadow. Jake went in first, camera light slicing through the darkness. I followed, flashlight trembling in my grip. The first floor was chaos, overturned desks, scattered papers, empty filing cabinets. But one caught Jake's attention. Locked, new-looking, just like the church door. He dug out bolt cutters from his backpack. "Standard urban explorer gear," he said. Curiosity overrode caution. Inside, we found folders. Not mining logs, not payroll, but checks, agreements, payments to Black Ridge families, all dated during the town's final months. Confidentiality clauses, relocation compensation, and notes in shaky handwriting. Husband refused initial offer. See Incident Report B. Another. Family relocated after consultation with security team. Jake filmed everything, hands shaking, whispering, "People need to know this." Then we found it. A thick folder labeled Tunnel Incident, Confidential. Photographs, black and white, showed a collapsed mine entrance. At first, it looked like a tragic accident, but one image made my stomach knot. A torn piece of flannel caught under the rubble. Medical examiner reports mentioned miners trapped inside. One memo from the company admitted only 7 deaths were reported. 4 more were quietly paid off. Jake paled. "We need copies of this," he said. "This is massive." That's when the diesel engine rumbled outside, a low, guttural sound that cut through the silence like a knife. We ducked to the windows. An old Ford F, rust eaten through its wheel wells, pulled up behind Jake's truck. 2 men emerged, both probably in their 50s. The bigger one carried a shotgun casually over his shoulder. The smaller one, thin, with a gray beard, had a gas can in hand. They stood, scanning, then spoke. "We know you're in there." Jake gripped my arm. "Back exit," he hissed. We crept around the building, only to find another truck blocking our way. The footsteps on the porch slowed, deliberate. The thin man's voice carried, "Just want to talk about your interest in private property." The bigger man, Carl, spoke next. "My grandfather worked these tunnels. Real shame outsiders come stirring old grief. We crouched behind filing cabinets, sweat cold against our backs. The thin man moved closer. I could smell cigarettes, motor oil, something sour underneath. Carl's scars caught the light, the blue of his eyes pale and unsettling. Jake did something I'll never forget. He stood, hands raised, calm, steady. College project, documenting ghost towns. Didn't know it was private property. We'll leave. Carl shifted the shotgun, but didn't fire. "Show me the footage," he demanded. Jake handed over the camera. The thin man scrolled through the footage, face darkening with every second. They saw everything, the folders, the mine, the collapsed tunnels. Then he removed the memory card, put it in his pocket, and crushed the camera beneath his boot. Plastic and glass shattered, echoing through the empty office. Carl's voice was low. "This town isn't abandoned. My family stayed close after Black Ridge closed. Promises were made. Payments kept our families fed for 2 generations. You destroy that, and..." He grabbed me by the shoulder, yanking me upright. "Here's what happens. You leave. Forget everything. Delete any copies. Go now." The thin man nodded to a woman near the church, confused, mid-20s, looking for help. Carl and the thin man escorted us to our truck, Jake trembling behind the wheel. As we drove down the switchbacks, my mind reeled. The quiet, the documents, the threats. It was too much to process. Jake puked on the roadside. I didn't even try to stop him. We never spoke of Black Ridge again. The highway stretched ahead, lights from distant cars flickering in the dark. The mountains behind us swallowed Black Ridge from view, but the memory didn't fade. Every turn, every shadow on the road made my skin crawl. Jake kept glancing at me, voice shaky. Did you see those folders? The payments? The miners?" I nodded, gripping the wheel tighter. "Yeah, and those 2, Carl and the thin guy. We weren't just trespassing. We stumbled into something dangerous." We drove in silence for a while. Eventually I asked, "Do you think that woman..." Jake swallowed hard. "I don't know. Maybe she really broke down. Or maybe she's part of it. One of them, keeping watch." I remembered her face. Confusion, then realization, subtle panic. A flicker of understanding that something was very wrong. I shivered. That night, back in my tiny apartment, I kept replaying everything. The quiet town, the locked church, the collapsed mine, the folders, the flannel, the promises Carl mentioned. Who else knew? How many more towns had similar secrets buried under official stories? I tried to write an article, my old journalism instincts kicking in, but the words felt hollow. How could I report this? We were intruders. We had no proof, no footage, nothing. And if Carl's warning held, trying could cost us more than just embarrassment. Days passed. Jake returned to work. His enthusiasm for urban exploration dimmed. He hadn't uploaded the footage, hadn't posted a single frame. 1 month later, the memory card, along with Jake's license, arrived in the mail. No note, no return address. Just a reminder of the control they had. I looked up Black Ridge online countless times. Nothing. No news, no hiker disappearances, no stories of a mysterious woman. It was as if the town had never existed. Sometimes late at night, I imagine someone else finding that filing cabinet. Another folder, another incident, quietly resolved, hidden from the world. I picture Carl and the thin man watching from the shadows, making sure their secrets remain buried. And sometimes, I swear I hear footsteps when I'm alone, faint and deliberate, like someone is walking just behind me, watching, waiting. Black Ridge isn't just a ghost town. It's a warning. Some stories are meant to stay locked away, and some towns are never truly empty. I told myself Willow Creek Lane would be a fresh start. After the divorce, I needed something that was mine alone, something to prove that the end of one life didn't mean the end of me. The house seemed perfect on paper. 2 stories, pale siding, chipped just enough to give it character, and a narrow porch that let out a protesting creak every time I shifted my weight. It wasn't perfect, but it was cheap, shockingly cheap. I signed the papers faster than I probably should have. The realtor said the market in small towns didn't attract much interest. I told myself I was lucky, though part of me wondered why a place this big sat unsold for so long. When I pulled up with my boxes, I wanted badly to believe I was doing the right thing. From the outside, the house looked tired, but harmless, like an old dog curled on a porch, waiting for someone to love it again. The first week was all about pretending. I painted the kitchen a soft green, unpacked boxes while the radio hummed, left the windows open so sunlight and cool air could chase away the stale odor of dust. I made it mine, or tried to. At night, the house creaked, but I told myself all old houses do. The neighbors were polite but distant. Some gave quick nods when they passed, while others avoided my eyes altogether, as if I carried some quiet infection they didn't want to catch. I figured it was the small-town way of dealing with strangers. Still, their silence had an edge to it, like they were holding back words they didn't dare speak aloud. One afternoon, sitting in the only cafe in town, I casually mentioned my new address to the barista. Just small talk, hoping maybe she'd offer advice about local plumbers or lawn care. But the moment I said Willow Creek, she faltered. Her hand shook as she tightened a lid on my cup. Willow Creek, she repeated, barely above a whisper. Then she forced a smile so quick it almost hurt to watch and muttered, "Hope it works out for you." Her words should have rolled off me. They didn't. They stuck like a splinter. A few days later, curiosity gnawed enough that I drove to the town clerk's office. The place smelled of mildew and forgotten books. I told the gray-haired clerk I needed to check the property records, playing it off as concern about taxes. She looked at me for a long moment before sliding a file across the counter, her face unreadable. The records chilled me. Page after page listed previous owners, always women, and next to each name, abrupt endings, missing, relocated, domestic disturbance, unresolved, not the clean handoff of one homeowner to another. These were jagged, unfinished stories. Reading the files felt like peeling back wallpaper only to find black mold crawling underneath. That evening, driving home, Willow Creek streets felt different, narrower, as if the houses leaned inward, watching me. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my stomach was tight with dread I couldn't name. I spread the papers across the kitchen table. Each name was a weight. Women who disappeared after months, others who left suddenly, belongings unclaimed. One case note read, "Disturbance, unresolved, no follow-up." The air in my kitchen felt thicker with every word I read. The house wasn't just shelter. It was a story I had stepped into halfway through, and all the endings so far were the same. That night, while brushing my teeth upstairs, I heard it for the first time. A scrape beneath the floorboards in the hallway. At first I thought, old house, settling wood. But then it repeated, slow, deliberate. A dragging sound, like someone sliding heavy furniture across bare boards. I froze, toothbrush clutched in my hand, stepped into the hallway. The sound stopped instantly. The silence afterward was worse, too sharp, too aware. The next morning, I searched the crawl space in the basement. Cobwebs, dust, nothing else. No signs of rodents, no loose boards, nothing that explained what I'd heard. I told myself it was exhaustion, my brain twisting ordinary noises into menace. But later, standing at the kitchen sink, I caught my reflection in the window, and something was wrong. The reflection didn't move in sync. My hand twitched faster than the image. The tilt of my head lingered in glass a half-second after I'd already straightened. By week's end, the house stopped feeling like mine. Sleep came only in short bursts. I'd wake to the sound of soft footsteps pacing across the upstairs landing, always stopping right outside my bedroom door. Each time, I'd sit up in bed, whispering into the dark just to remind myself I still had a voice. No one answered, but the air afterward felt heavier, as if someone had been standing outside listening. One night, I pressed my ear to the door when the footsteps came. The boards creaked, slow, measured, then silence, and then breathing. Not words, not a voice, just the sound of steady human breathing, inches away, separated from me by nothing but a thin panel of wood. I slammed my fist against the door. The breathing stopped. Retreating steps faded into nothing. The next morning, shaking and furious, I went back to the clerk's office. I asked if any of the missing women had ever been found. The clerk didn't answer at first. She just slid the file back across the counter and murmured, "You'll leave soon too. Everyone does." Her voice carried no malice, just certainty. That night I called a realtor. I told them to put the house on the market immediately. I didn't even bother to pack everything. Survival felt more important than furniture. Even now, I can't explain why leaving felt less like escape and more like surrender. But when you stand in a house where footsteps pause outside your door at night, where breathing seeps through the walls, where every record of past tenants ends in vanishing, leaving isn't cowardice, it's survival. The next morning, sunlight poured through the cracks in the blinds, but it didn't bring comfort. My body felt heavy, like I'd been awake all night, even though I remembered closing my eyes at some point. I sat up, clutching my head, and the dream from the night before flashed back in jagged fragments. The hallway, the figures without faces, the whisper in my ear. It hadn't felt like a dream. It had felt like something that had truly happened. I tried to rationalize. Stress, isolation, maybe a touch of paranoia. But then my eyes wandered to the corner of the room, where the armchair sat. For a brief, breathless second, I could have sworn the cushion was still indented, like someone had been sitting there all night, watching me sleep. I forced myself to leave the cabin. I needed space, air, proof that the world outside wasn't warped. The woods were still and damp with morning dew. Birds fluttered between branches, and for the first time in days, I heard something alive other than myself. I stayed out there for hours, walking further down the trail than I ever had, until the cabin was out of sight. By the time I circled back, the sun had begun to dip again, and my dread returned with the growing shadows. At the edge of the cabin porch, I froze. The front door was wide open. I knew, without a shred of doubt, that I had locked it behind me. Inside, the air was colder. The smell of damp earth and old wood clung heavier than before. My belongings weren't scattered, but something was off. It was subtle. My jacket draped differently over the chair, my bag slightly unzipped. Someone had been inside. I checked the rooms in a frenzy, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. Nothing. No one. The basement door stood closed, but the thought of opening it filled me with nausea. I decided not to. I dragged a chair under the handle, convincing myself it would keep whatever was down there. That night, sleep never came. Every creak of the old wood sounded like footsteps. Every rustle of wind against the glass felt like fingers tapping. Around 3 a.m, the power went out. The cabin was swallowed by darkness so complete it was like being buried alive. I lit a candle, hands shaking, the flame trembling as badly as I did. That's when I heard it. From the other side of the basement door, 3 slow knocks. I held my breath, heart in my throat. Knock, knock, knock. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I staggered backward, clutching the candle. The knocks stopped, replaced by something worse, a dragging sound, something moving across the basement floor, slow and deliberate. I ran into the bedroom and slammed the door shut, locking it and shoving a dresser against it. I sat in the corner with the candle until sunrise, my ears straining for every sound. When morning finally came, I gathered my things and made the decision. I had to leave. I didn't care if Nate thought I was overreacting. I wasn't staying another night. But when I stepped onto the porch, I froze again. The woods were silent, completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. And at the edge of the trees, Barely visible between the trunks, something stood. It looked human at first, but the longer I stared, the more wrong it became. Its arms seemed too long, its head tilted unnaturally. It didn't move, didn't breathe. It just stood there, watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. That was enough. I bolted down the path, my bag bouncing against my shoulder, legs burning with the effort of running until I saw my car parked at the end of the trail. Relief nearly brought me to my knees, but as I reached the driver's side, I saw it again. In the reflection of the window, standing right behind me. I spun around. Nothing. I fumbled the keys into the ignition, engine roaring to life. Gravel spit under the tires as I peeled away, refusing to look back at the cabin. I never told Nate the full story. I just said his place gave me the creeps. He laughed, said the cabin had always had character. But even now, sometimes when I'm home, I wake in the middle of the night and feel it. That same weight in the corner of the room. That same sense that I'm not alone. And once, just once, I swear I heard it again. 3 slow knocks. When I signed the lease for the house on Birchwood Lane in Whispering Pines, I told myself it was the fresh start I needed. After the breakup, every corner of the city felt like it belonged to her. The bookstore where she spent hours lost in paperbacks, the cafe where she always ordered too much sugar in her coffee, even the laundromat with its humming machines. All of it haunted me. My apartment had turned into a tomb of old routines. I was restless, exhausted, and desperate to step outside of the shadow I'd been living under. The ad online had felt like a lifeline. Quiet streets, friendly neighbors, a library worth getting lost in. It sounded idyllic, too good for the price listed. But grief makes bargains sound believable. I packed what I could fit into my car and left without a backward glance. Driving into Whispering Pines felt like pulling into a painting. White porches lined with rocking chairs, freshly painted fences, flower beds trimmed to perfection. Even the mailboxes looked like props, each one stenciled neatly with family names. It was almost staged. The strangest part wasn't the perfection, it was the warmth. Every person I passed waved. Every smile was wide, unshakable. Strangers greeted me like a cousin they hadn't seen in years. After weeks of loneliness, the politeness was overwhelming, almost intoxicating. But the more time I spent there, the more I noticed the cracks. Conversations were polite, but shallow. When I told someone where I had come from, they nodded, smiling, as if they already knew. But no one ever asked a follow-up. No one seemed curious. Their warmth felt rehearsed, like they were reading from the same script. The library quickly became my refuge. It was the kind of building that belonged on a postcard. 2 stories, heavy oak doors, sunlight spilling in through tall windows. The air smelled like dust and lemon polish, the kind of scent that belonged to old wood and older secrets. I found myself wandering upstairs often, where long oak tables sat beneath beams of light. That was where I first found the journals. They were wedged between history books, tucked too far back to be accidental. Thin, leather-bound, their covers smudged with dates that blurred into one another. They weren't catalogued, and they definitely didn't belong on the shelves. I opened the first one and froze. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, words bleeding into one another, as if the writer had been racing against something unseen. The name at the front wasn't local. It was Emily Kerr. She wrote about moving to Whispering Pines after a divorce, about how the people here welcomed her with endless kindness. But as the pages went on, her words grew frantic. They smile, but they're waiting. At night, I hear them outside. They don't want you to leave. No one leaves. The hairs on my neck lifted. There were more journals, dozens, each from different outsiders, people who had come here, just like me. Each one described the same pattern, the town's endless kindness, the invitations to gatherings you couldn't refuse, the sense of being watched everywhere you went, and always the same conclusion. No one ever left Whispering Pines. I slipped one journal into my jacket and hurried home, pulse racing. That night, I read it by lamplight, every creak in the walls making me jump. The writer had detailed invitations, potlucks, book clubs, community dinners. Refusing wasn't an option. Every no was met with relentless smiles and more insistence. The final entry was nearly illegible, just scratches across the page. But the last clear line burned into my mind. The kindness is the trap. From then on, I couldn't unsee it. Mrs. Larkin, my landlord, showed up unannounced every day with pies or loaves of bread. Her eyes never blinked enough. Her smile stretched too tight, like she was waiting for me to make a mistake. The man at the gas station asked me the same questions word for word each time I visited, as if rehearsing a script. The more I noticed, the more suffocated I felt, as though the whole town was a performance, and I was the only one who hadn't learned my lines. The turning point came at the library again. I returned to the section upstairs only to find a staff-only sign blocking the shelves. It hadn't been there the day before. As I lingered, the librarian, a tall man with graying hair, looked at me from behind his desk. His stare was steady, too steady, and it pinned me in place. "You've found enough to settle in," he said softly. His voice was calm, but the weight of the words made my stomach clench. Best to stop digging. It didn't sound like advice. It sounded like a warning. That night, I tested the truth. I packed a small duffel bag, just clothes, some cash, nothing that screamed, "I'm leaving forever." At midnight, I started the car and drove toward the highway. The streets were empty, too empty. No porch lights, no stray cats, no rustling of crickets. Just silence pressing in against the windows. When I reached the town's exit sign, my headlights caught them. Cones lined across the road. 2 trucks parked sideways blocking the way. Their headlights glared back at me, blinding, and though I saw no drivers, I felt the weight of eyes watching. I didn't try to push past. I turned the car around. The next morning, Whispering Pines carried on as if nothing had happened. Mrs. Larkin waved with another basket of bread. The gas station man repeated his lines like clockwork. Nobody said a word about my midnight attempt. It was as if the town itself was daring me to bring it up. I didn't, but something inside me shifted. I wasn't just unsettled anymore. I was trapped. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I shut my eyes, I swore I could still hear that dragging sound along the hallway, the one I had pretended wasn't real. My flashlight lay on the nightstand, battery half dead, but I kept it within reach like a lifeline. By dawn, the house looked deceptively harmless. Sunlight spilled over the faded wallpaper and warmed the wooden floor, but the air felt heavy, as if the house itself were holding its breath. I forced myself into the kitchen, made stale coffee, and told myself I'd last just 3 more nights. Then I'd leave, money or no money. I tried to stay busy, sweeping dust from corners, straightening the warped frames on the walls. That's when I noticed something strange. Nearly every photograph had been turned slightly, facing away from the hallway. I adjusted one, angling it straight, and instantly felt a jolt of wrongness. The photo showed the previous family. 2 parents, a little boy, and, oddly, a faint blur at the edge of the frame, like someone moving too quickly to be captured. The longer I stared, the clearer it became. It wasn't just a blur. It was a shape. A tall figure standing half in shadow. I set the picture down, unsettled, and made the mistake of glancing into the hallway. For a split second, I thought I saw someone standing at the end of it, motionless, watching. My chest tightened. I blinked. The hallway was empty. The day dragged on, but night fell too quickly. By the time I lay back down, exhaustion should have knocked me out cold. Instead, the silence pressed against me like a weight. Around midnight, the dragging started again, slow, deliberate, scraping along the wood. This time I couldn't ignore it. I got up, flashlight trembling in my hand, and followed the sound. Each step I took seemed to echo louder than the last. The hallway stretched out unnaturally, like the house itself had grown longer. The dragging stopped in front of the door to the basement. My stomach churned. I knew I shouldn't open it, but the handle was cold beneath my hand, almost expectant. The door creaked open, and the smell of rot hit me like a slap. My flashlight beam shook as I aimed it downward. The basement looked darker than it should have been, the shadows thicker, almost alive. Something moved. At first, I thought it was just the beam of light catching on debris, but then it shifted again. Something pale, something crawling. I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. The figure stopped halfway up the steps, head tilted too far to one side, eyes gleaming faintly in the dark. And then it smiled. Not a human smile, but something wide and stretched, a grin carved too deep into its face. I slammed the basement door shut so hard the frame rattled. My back hit the wall, heart pounding like it was trying to break free. I didn't wait. I packed what little I had into my bag and stumbled outside into the night air. The house loomed behind me, its windows dark and watching. Even from the yard, I could swear I heard the dragging start again, as if something was climbing higher, closer to the rooms I had just fled. I didn't look back again. But even now, weeks later, when I try to sleep in my own apartment, I sometimes wake up to the faint sound of wood scraping just beyond my bedroom door. 4 months ago, I inherited a diner from my great-aunt Dolores, a woman I'd barely met twice in my life. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon while I was staring at my cramped Chicago apartment walls, scrolling through job listings after yet another failed interview. The lawyer's voice sounded almost amused when he told me I now owned the Blue Moon Diner in Gralton, Iowa. I laughed, thinking it was a scam, but when he sent over the paperwork, I realized it was real. Equipment, recipes, a tiny apartment above the diner, the works. After months of unemployment, dwindling savings, and soul-crushing boredom, I figured, why not? Worst-case scenario, I'd fail and move back to the city. Best case, well, maybe I'd finally have something to call my own. The drive to Gralton was longer than expected. The town barely showed up on GPS, a patch of asphalt and brick buildings wedged between endless cornfields. Population, 712, according to the peeling sign at the town limits. Main Street truly was the main street, lined with a barber shop, an antique store, and the Blue Moon Diner, smack in the middle like a forgotten jewel. Stepping inside for the first time, the smell hit me. Old grease, lemon cleaner, and something else. Something I couldn't name. The locals didn't waste time showing up. Mrs. Holloway from the post office brought a casserole. Tom from the gas station offered to fix the broken neon sign, and a dozen others simply came in to greet me. Their smiles were wide, their compliments almost aggressive. "We're so glad the diner's reopening," they said. "The town hasn't been the same without it." But there was something in their eyes, careful, watchful, that unsettled me. The first week blurred into a haze of cleaning, organizing, and trying to understand Dolores's meticulous system. Inventory lists dated back decades, supplier contacts written in perfect cursive, and a metal lockbox in the office that stubbornly refused to open. Everything else was in order, but the lockbox sat there like a dark promise. Then I found her recipe collection, handwritten index cards, yellowed with age, some dating back to the diner's opening. Each measurement was precise, never a pinch or a dash, but exact teaspoons, tablespoons, ounces. Each card carefully preserved in plastic sleeves, like the secrets of the universe were hidden inside. Mrs. Holloway stopped by every morning for coffee. She always sat at the same stool, always ordered the same things, always watched me with those sharp blue eyes. I felt her gaze lingering longer than necessary, especially when I prepared the chili. By week 2, the diner ran smoothly enough to open for breakfast and lunch. The locals flocked in, ravenous for Dolores's recipes. The meatloaf on Mondays, chicken pot pie on Wednesdays, and the Friday chili, which people called weeks in advance to reserve. George, the hardware store owner, swore that chili had never changed in all his 60 years. People drove from neighboring towns just to eat it. I followed the recipes religiously. Every measure, every spice, every temperature, and the compliments poured in. Just like Dolores used to make, they'd say. Haven't had this in years. I started thinking maybe this inheritance wasn't a curse after all. Maybe it was my chance to start over. Then I found the newspaper clippings. I was cleaning out the basement, trying to make room for supplies, when a toppled box revealed a bundle of old articles wrapped in plastic. The headlines made my stomach drop. Mystery illness strikes Blue Moon Diner. Police investigate possible poisoning at local restaurant. Blue Moon temporarily closed as death toll rises to 3. 3 people had died after eating the Friday chili. 2 more were hospitalized for weeks. The police investigated, but never found evidence of foul play. Health inspectors eventually cleared the diner, chalking it up to contaminated ingredients. But one small article caught my eye. The victims had all been outsiders, strangers, newcomers, all sitting alone at the counter. Photos of the victims stared back at me. A traveling salesman from Nebraska, a young woman passing through, an elderly man who'd just moved to town. All strangers, all dead, all within days of eating the same chili I'd been following from Dolores's recipe cards. Panic clawed at my chest as I thought about every meal I'd served that week. Every bowl of chili, every pot of soup, every perfectly measured spoonful. I climbed back upstairs, heart pounding, as the lunch rush began. Through the window, locals filled the booths, chatting, laughing, completely unaware, or pretending to be. That night, I couldn't cook. I told them I was feeling unwell and closed early. Mrs. Holloway seemed genuinely concerned, patting my hand and urging me to rest. Once the diner emptied, I went straight for the lockbox. I tried everything: paper clips, screwdrivers, even a hammer. Around midnight, I finally found a small key taped under Dolores's desk drawer. Inside were 2 sets of recipe cards, identical yet subtly different. The chili recipe in the lockbox called for regular paprika, while the filing cabinet card specified Hungarian paprika from a particular local farm. The meatloaf differed in breadcrumbs, the chicken pot pie in flour type. Every recipe had a subtle variation. At the bottom of the lockbox set was a note in Dolores's careful handwriting, for outsiders passing through. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. 2 sets of recipes, one for locals, one for strangers. This was deliberate. I dove into old forums, archived news, even a memorial page for one of the victims. Janet Bauer, passing through town, had eaten the Friday chili alone at the counter. She'd taken photos of her meal. In the background of one, I saw Mrs. Holloway sitting at her usual stool, eating the chili just fine. The difference between the recipes was threefold: paprika sauce, a specific type of cumin, and something called prairie sage. Locals were fine, outsiders, toxic. The next morning, I had to decide. Opening the diner was mandatory. The Friday chili was sacred. I used the safe recipe from the filing cabinet. Mrs. Holloway came in for her coffee, her eyes sharp as ever. Dolores always said the secret is in the details, she murmured, almost to herself. Then the stranger walked in, a man I'd never seen, California plates on his car. He sat at the counter where Janet Bauer had once sat, ordered the chili. Mrs. Holloway glanced at him, then at me, her expression unreadable. I served him the safe chili. He ate it, smiled, and left unharmed. Immediately, the diner changed. Holloway left quietly, followed by the other locals. The tables that had been packed minutes before were suddenly empty. Silence pressed down on me like a physical weight. I found a note under the register. Dolores understood her responsibility. Gravelton takes care of its own. I packed that night, tossing everything into boxes and garbage bags. The lockbox went with me. Evidence or insurance, I wasn't sure. I drove through dawn, past the peeling population sign one last time, and understood what the articles had never explained. This wasn't hatred, it was preservation. Decades ago, the town discovered that local herbs, spices, and preparation methods created immunity in residents, but were lethal to outsiders. Over generations, they'd turned survival into a ritual, a filter, a way to keep Gravelton exactly as it had always been. I filed a report with the FBI, though I knew it would likely go nowhere. The Blue Moon Diner is closed now, waiting for the next distant relative, someone willing to understand, or perhaps too naive to resist. And I'll never forget the watchful eyes of a town that had learned long ago how to protect itself, one recipe at a time. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to write about something like this, but silence is eating me alive. Maybe putting it into words will help me breathe again, or maybe it will serve as a warning to whoever stumbles across it, because what happened last August shattered my grip on reality. At the time, I was living in Austin, working as an electrical contractor. My life was plain, steady, predictable. That's all I ever wanted after my parents died in that wreck on Route 9 when I was 19. I left my small Kentucky hometown the same year and swore I'd never look back. Too many memories, too many ghosts. The kind of town where everyone knew your business before you did. I thought I'd escaped it for good. But then came the phone call. It was a Wednesday, hot enough that the asphalt shimmered outside my workshop window. I just finished a mug of coffee when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The area code was from back home. My thumb hovered over decline, but something made me answer. "Is this Daniel Caldwell?" The voice rasped. It was low and scratchy, the kind of tone you'd expect from a chain smoker who'd burned out their lungs years ago. But what unsettled me most was that they used my full name, middle name included. Almost no one knew that anymore. "Yes. Who's this?" I asked. A pause. Then, "Someone who knew your father better than you ever realized. There's something in the old house. Answers to questions you don't even know to ask. It's waiting for you." Before I could press for details, the line went dead. No goodbye, no number to call back. When I tried, the call failed instantly, like it had never existed. I spent the rest of the day fumbling through my work, my hands trembling as I stripped wires and soldered joints. The voice crawled through my head like static. By sundown, I'd made a choice I told myself was temporary. Just a drive, just a peek, nothing more. But deep down, I knew I was already caught in something. I packed a bag, filled the truck, and drove through the night. Highways unraveled into state routes, which thinned into the winding Appalachian backroads I hadn't traveled in years. The closer I got, the more reality seemed to warp. The air felt stale, like I'd stepped into an old photograph where the colors were fading. By morning, I rolled past the sign for my hometown. The letters were still chipped and sun-bleached, but something felt wrong. Not wrong in a horror movie way. Wrong in the way your stomach twists when you realize someone has been in your house while you were gone. The streets were quiet. Not dead, exactly. Just paused. Cars sat in driveways, but most were dusted with pollen and leaves, like they hadn't moved in years. Mailboxes sagged under envelopes spilling onto the ground. The grocery store's lights glowed, but through the glass doors I saw shelves lined with expired cereal boxes and dust so thick it looked like frost. I drove slowly past downtown, the barber shop where my dad got his hair cut, the church where my mother led choir practice, all still standing, but hollow somehow. In the half hour it took to circle the town, I saw maybe 3 people. An old woman sweeping her porch until she noticed me and darted inside. A man in overalls who literally turned his back and walked away when I waved. And a shadow in a second-story window, curtain drawn just as I spotted it. Some houses looked freshly painted, yards mowed, flower beds neat. Others right next door were collapsed, roofs sagging, weeds overtaking porches. No logic, no pattern. It was like someone had selectively preserved pieces of town and abandoned the rest. But it was the silence that strangled me most. No barking dogs, no kids playing, no hum of lawnmowers, just nothing. When I turned down Sycamore Drive and saw my childhood home, my chest locked up. It looked perfect. The white siding I'd painted with Dad that summer before I left was spotless. The green shutters gleamed. The flower beds brimmed with purple petunias, my mother's favorites. Even the mailbox was freshly painted, our family name still stenciled in looping script, but details broke the illusion. A brand new rubber doormat replaced the one my mother had woven by hand. Security cameras blinked under the eaves, small black domes that hadn't been there when I left. And the front door? Unlocked. The smell hit first. Vanilla air freshener fighting something chemical underneath, sharp and sterile, like a hospital corridor. The furniture was gone. Every chair, every couch, every photo frame erased. In their place stood rows of metal filing cabinets, labels marking years from 1984 to 2018. The dining table, our Sunday dinner spot, was covered in manila folders, documents spread out as if someone had just been working there. Coffee rings still damp on the paper. But what stopped me cold was the wall. The hallway where my mom used to tape up my report cards was now plastered with photographs. Dozens of children, school portraits, birthday candids, playground snapshots. And I recognized faces. Tommy Brennan, who moved to Florida when I was 10. Lisa Garrett, whose family supposedly left for Texas. Kevin Walsh, gone after his mom's divorce. People said Oregon, but here they were. Their names scrawled beneath the pictures with dates and case numbers, dates that matched their departures. They hadn't moved. They had vanished. Hands shaking, I flipped through the folders. Police reports never filed. Witness statements never submitted. Autopsy notes stamped. Investigation suspended. And then I saw it. My father's handwriting. Hundreds of pages, scrawled letters to state police, the FBI, anyone who would listen. He was documenting the disappearances. He saw the pattern. He knew. One note dated a week before his death chilled me more than anything. They're not just taking them anymore. They're replacing families, bringing in lookalikes. Check dental records. Check birth certificates. These aren't the same people. The day before the crash, he'd received a letter. Your concerns have been noted. No further action will be taken. Consider this matter closed. I staggered backward, heart hammering, when footsteps creaked across the porch. The front door opened. 3 people walked in like they owned the place. A gray-bearded man, boots muddy. A tall man with a scar along his neck. A woman with a clipboard. They weren't cops, not officially, but they moved like them. Controlled. Ready. The bearded man smiled, and my blood froze. He looked exactly like Sheriff Coleman. The same missing tooth. The same smirk. But Sheriff Coleman had been 60 when I left. If alive, he'd be pushing 80 now. This man looked like him. 30 years ago. You got the call then, he said. Not a question. A statement. And I knew I was in trouble. I must have dozed off because the next thing I remember was the sound of whispering. It was faint, just at the edge of my hearing, but it was unmistakable. I froze where I lay on the couch, my heart thudding so hard I thought it might shake the cushions beneath me. The whispers weren't coming from the hallway or the kitchen. They were above me, in the attic. I forced myself to sit up, moving as quietly as I could. My eyes darted toward the ceiling, following the sound. The faint cadence of words seemed to slip between the boards, low and urgent, like a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I told myself it could be the wind, or raccoons, or just the house settling. But the longer I listened, the clearer it became. These were voices, and they were speaking to each other. I grabbed the flashlight from the coffee table, my hand trembling as I clicked it on. Its beam cut through the darkness, slicing across the ceiling. I stood, knees weak, and stared at the pull-string hatch to the attic above the hall. The whispers stopped. Dead silence. It was worse than hearing them. For almost 5 minutes, I stood in that hallway, staring upward with the flashlight shaking in my grip, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. At last, I forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow in the still air. I muttered something about exhaustion, about my mind playing tricks, but I didn't go back to the couch. I locked myself in the guest bedroom. That night, I dreamed. In the dream, I was standing at the top of the farmhouse stairs, looking down into the living room. The room was dim, lit only by the dying glow of the fireplace. A figure crouched in the corner, its back to me. It shifted slightly, and I realized it was too tall, its limbs too long, its posture twisted like a broken marionette. I wanted to scream, to call out, but my throat was locked. The figure turned its head, not all the way, just far enough that I saw the glint of its pale eye in the firelight. Then it stood, slow and deliberate, and began climbing the stairs toward me. I woke up, gasping. The sheets were damp with sweat, the flashlight still clutched in my hand. The door was still locked, yet faintly, I could smell smoke, as though the fireplace downstairs had been burning all night, but I hadn't lit it. The following day dragged in suffocating silence. I tried reading, then cooking, then walking laps around the porch, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching me. I kept noticing little changes. The chair by the window had shifted slightly. The rug by the kitchen door looked off. The clock above the mantel ticked in uneven rhythms. Late that afternoon, I mustered the courage to go down into the basement again. Maybe if I faced it head-on, the unease would go away. The smell was worse than before. My flashlight revealed more scratches along the beams, gouges that curved like fingernails digging desperately into the wood. I crouched low, studying them, and saw something lodged in one of the grooves, a fragment of bone. I dropped the light, stumbling backward so hard I slammed against the wall. My stomach twisted, and I barely kept from retching. When I picked the flashlight back up, my hands shaking uncontrollably, the fragment was gone. The scratches were still there, but the bone had vanished, as if it had never been. That was when I heard it. A creak above me, slow, deliberate, like a footstep crossing the kitchen floor. Someone was in the house. I bolted upstairs, slamming the basement door behind me. The kitchen was empty, but the air felt charged, thick with static, as though someone had just left the room. My skin prickled, and every instinct screamed for me to run, but my keys and phone were still in the living room. I hurried toward them, but halfway across the hall, something caught my eye. The mirror. It was just a small, old-fashioned thing hanging near the stairwell, but in its reflection, I saw movement, something darting across the living room. Too fast, too thin, bending wrong. When I spun around, there was nothing. I told myself I was leaving. Forget Nate, forget the house, forget whatever favor I had agreed to. I grabbed my keys, stuffed my phone in my pocket, and marched toward the front door. The knob wouldn't turn. It wasn't locked. It simply wouldn't move, as though it had fused to the frame. I tugged harder, then slammed my shoulder against it, but the door didn't budge. I ran to the back door, the kitchen door, even the side porch door. None of them would open. It was as if the house had sealed itself shut. That night was the longest of my life. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of shadow kept me on edge. I sat in the living room with the flashlight in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other, straining to hear any sign of movement. Hours passed like days. At some point I must have drifted, because I woke to the sound of the attic hatch swinging open above the hallway. My body locked in place. I listened as something descended the steps, its weight making the wood groan with each slow, deliberate step. My heart hammered as the sound drew closer, closer, until it stopped just at the edge of the living room. I lifted the flashlight with a shaking hand, aiming it toward the hall. The beam landed on nothing. The hall was empty, but the attic steps were down. I don't remember the next few minutes clearly. Panic took over. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair, the flashlight spinning out of my hand. The beam rolled across the floor, and in its sweep I caught a glimpse, just a glimpse, of something crouched low in the hall, its face pale and blurred, like a smear of smoke caught in glass. It lunged. I don't remember screaming, but my throat was raw when I woke on the porch at dawn, the front door wide open behind me. My keys were still in my hand. I didn't go back inside. I didn't wait for Nate to come home. I left, and I've never told him what I saw, but sometimes late at night, when the world is quiet, I hear the creak of steps above me, and I wonder if something followed me home. The morning I drove into Black Hollow, West Virginia, the air felt heavy, like the whole valley was holding its breath. I had nothing left to lose. My savings were gone, my job stripped away, and my future shrank to a single desperate choice: renting a cabin in the Appalachian woods for cheap and hoping I could piece my life together before everything collapsed completely. The drive was long, the roads narrowing with every mile, until GPS gave up altogether. From there, I followed a crumpled sheet of handwritten directions, mailboxes, a rusted water tower. Turn left after the third wooden fence with barbed wire, the note said. By the time I stopped for gas, my nerves were already raw. The only station in town looked like a museum exhibit from the 1970s. Dim, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, faded soda posters curling off the windows. The attendant, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s with her gray hair tied back, never looked away as I filled the tank. Inside, when I handed over my card, she studied my face like she was memorizing it. "You heading up to the Garrett place?" she asked finally. The words landed heavy. Not the cabin, not a rental, the Garrett place. I nodded. She flicked her gaze toward an older man at the counter buying cigarettes. A look passed between them, quick, but enough to raise the hair on the back of my neck. Neither spoke again, but when I stepped outside, the man followed. He loitered near his truck, pretending to check his phone, though his eyes never left me. His truck carried an old decal, a bald eagle clutching arrows, but the text beneath was too faded to read. Something about the way he stood there, unblinking, made me want to drive faster than I ever had in my life. The road to the cabin twisted deep into the forest, dirt crunching under my tires. Every so often I noticed the same strange symbol carved in orange paint across tree trunks, 3 diagonal slashes always on the right side. At first, I thought it might have been a logging marker, but the precision was too deliberate. Always the same number, always in the same place. The Garrett cabin stood waiting at the end of a clearing. Wooden siding, a stone fireplace, a porch that looked like it had absorbed too many winters. On the surface, it was exactly as advertised. But the quiet was different here. It wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your ears until you swore you heard things that weren't there. Inside, the cabin was clean, but smelled wrong. A mix of pine cleaner and raw copper, like pennies rubbed together. In the bedroom closet, I stumbled across a cardboard box left behind. Inside, Army surplus gear, canvas bags stamped with strange insignias, old ammo tins, and photocopied papers. I didn't dig too deep. Not then. That night, the isolation came down on me like a weight. No passing cars, no crickets, not even the distant rumble of planes, only wind groaning through the trees. Around midnight, I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. They creaked across the porch. I froze, heart pounding, as a man stepped into view through the thin gap in the curtain. He didn't knock. He didn't move. Just stood there with his hands in his pockets, his face hidden beneath a baseball cap. Minutes dragged by. Then he walked down the steps, disappearing into the black. I told myself I imagined it, that maybe he was checking on the property for the owner. But when I forced myself to sleep, I shoved a chair under the doorknob. The next morning, reality crushed denial. Bootprints circled the cabin, deep ones pressed beneath every window. At the bathroom window, the tracks were sunk deeper, as though someone had stood there, waiting. On the back door, smeared into the dirt, were 3 diagonal lines, just like the orange marks on the trees. The town felt safer, so I drove back for cell service. At a diner, I ordered coffee, trying to act like everything was normal. but the young waitress leaned close as she poured, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You should leave." That was it. No explanation. No eye contact after. Her hand shook as she made change. From the kitchen window, I caught the cook staring at me. Not hostile, just blank, as if committing every detail of me to memory. The drive back was worse. A dark blue truck tailed me the entire way, matching my speed, headlights glaring in my rearview mirror. When I pulled onto the dirt road, it slowed to a crawl, engine humming low, then kept going. Back at the cabin, my heart stopped cold. The box I'd seen in the closet was now sitting on the kitchen table. Papers spread out neatly. Someone had been there. Someone had touched them. And the message scrawled across the bottom of one page in fresh ink. "She's here." When I tried to leave, my car wouldn't start. The engine clicked but never turned. Nothing looked cut. Nothing broken. But someone had sabotaged it. That was when the sound came. Engines. Multiple. Headlights swept the trees. 3 trucks rolled up and parked in a semicircle around my car. 8 men stepped out. The man from the porch was there. This time he carried a rifle. They didn't rush me, didn't shout, just spread out, surrounding the cabin like hunters closing in on prey. And then the bearded man appeared. His face weathered, voice calm as he knocked politely. "We need to talk," he said, almost gently. "About your situation." He paused. "You've found property that doesn't belong to you." The word property sent ice through my veins. He wasn't talking about the cabin. They gave me 10 minutes to come out, and I realized they weren't bluffing. I stood frozen inside the cabin, my back pressed to the bedroom wall, listening to the man's calm voice as if it seeped through the wood. "You've got 10 minutes, he repeated, his tone steady. "Come out and we'll handle this like civilized people." Civilized. The word twisted in my gut. Outside, I could hear the shuffling of boots on dirt, the faint metallic click of weapons being checked. They were patient, confident, like they'd done this a dozen times before. I remembered the papers spread across the table. Among the manifestos and minutes, there had been a hand-drawn map. My mind replayed the sketch. A creek, half a mile behind the cabin, a mark labeled emergency cache. If there was anything useful out there, anything that could help me survive, it was my only chance. I turned on the faucet and flicked the TV on low, hoping the noise would mask what I was about to do. Then I slipped into the bathroom, slid the lock into place, and wrestled the window open. The frame groaned softly, but the men outside didn't seem to hear. My ribs scraped against the sill as I squeezed through, my bag dropping first, then me. The cold night air hit like ice water. From the front of the cabin, I heard the bearded man call again, voice sharp now. 9 minutes. I crawled on hands and knees into the tree line, every breath shallow, every snapped twig like a flare in the silence. The woods swallowed me, shadows stretching into endless black columns of pine. The creek appeared exactly where the map promised, glimmering faintly under a sliver of moonlight. I scanned the bank desperately until I spotted it, a green metal box buried beneath roots. My fingers shook as I pried it open. Inside, bundles of cash, 2 prepaid cell phones, a ring of keys, and a pistol wrapped in oilcloth. The metal was cold in my hands, heavier than I expected. I shoved it aside. A gun wouldn't save me if 8 armed men closed in, but the phone, ancient, yes, but when I powered it on, a single bar flickered in the corner of the screen. Enough. I dialed 911, my voice shaking as I whispered, "I'm being held against my will at the Garrett cabin in Black Hollow. Armed men, please." The dispatcher went quiet. For a long moment, all I heard was static. Then finally, "We'll send someone. Stay hidden." "It may take time." Her hesitation told me everything. She knew. She knew exactly what Black Hollow was. Shouts erupted in the distance, glass shattering. They'd realized I wasn't inside anymore. "Check the creek," the bearded man's voice bellowed, stripped now of politeness. Panic surged. I slammed the box shut, grabbed the phone and cash, and sprinted into the woods. Branches lashed at my arms and face. My lungs burned. Then the barking started, deep, guttural, furious. Dogs. My heart nearly gave out. They weren't just men. They had hounds trained for this. I threw myself into a hollow formed by fallen trees, crawling into the damp rot beneath the branches. I dragged leaves and sticks over my body, forcing myself flat. Every inch of me screamed to run, but I knew if I moved, I was finished. The barking drew closer, so close I could hear the wet snarl of jaws snapping. Men's voices followed, radios crackling. "Tracks head east. Spread out. Don't let her get to the road." I pressed a hand over my mouth, praying my breath wouldn't give me away. Minutes stretched into something endless. Ants crawled across my skin. The smell of dirt filled my nose. My body trembled with the effort of stillness. One man passed so close I heard his ragged breathing, his boots crunching inches from where I lay hidden. A beam of light cut across the hollow, lingering for a heartbeat too long. Then, sirens. Faint at first, then louder. The dogs stopped barking. The men shouted, panicked now, their once coordinated movements unraveling. Flashlights jerked erratically through the trees as they turned back toward the cabin. The phone buzzed in my hand. The dispatcher's voice, low and urgent. "Stay where you are. Units are on the scene." I didn't dare move until another voice, closer, female, steady, called out from the trees. "State Police! Is anyone out here?" I inched my head up. Through the lattice of branches, I saw a uniformed officer sweeping a flashlight. Her hand rested on her sidearm, eyes scanning nervously. I pushed myself out of the hollow, twigs snapping as I stumbled forward. She caught sight of me, startled, then rushed over, steadying me by the arm. "You're safe," she whispered, though her voice trembled as much as mine. She led me out of the woods to a dirt road now lit with blinding floodlights. Police cruisers, black SUVs, armed agents moving in tight formations. The bearded man stood cuffed beside a truck, his expression calm, almost smug, as if this wasn't the end but merely an inconvenience. 3 others were detained nearby, but most of the vehicles, the dark blue truck, the one from the gas station, were gone, slipped away before the law clamped down. The officer guided me into a cruiser. "We've been watching this group for years," she said quietly, as though the trees might still be listening. "We didn't think anyone would ever get close enough to expose them." Her words chilled me more than the night air. Watching them, for years, and they'd still been allowed to thrive, tucked into these mountains, hiding in plain sight. I gave statements for days at a motel 2 counties over. Agents showed me photographs of weapons caches, maps, blueprints of government buildings marked with red X's. The box at the creek hadn't just been supplies. It was evidence of something far larger, something they called Day Zero. I never went back for my car. They told me it was safer that way. When they let me leave, I carried only a bag of clothes, one of the prepaid phones, and a wad of cash they'd said I could keep. Evidence, they told me, untraceable. But at night, when I lie awake, I sometimes think about the men who weren't caught, the trucks that drove away into the darkness. The way the bearded man's eyes never once showed fear. Groups like that don't disappear. They wait. They adapt. They dig deeper into the hollow places where no one looks. And sometimes, when I'm scrolling through news headlines, I'll stop cold at a story about an isolated incident in some other Appalachian town. A power outage, a missing federal employee, an unexplained fire. I wonder if it's them, and I wonder how long it will be before they come looking for me.